Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Gary Parker. Today we have episode 423 for April 7th, 2025. And we got a new show for you today. Lots of stuff to talk about. Most of it bad, unfortunately. We got a couple good notes, but most of it's stuff you're going to want to know about and watch out for. Before we get to that, though, I finally got around to doing another Dragon Challenge coin promotion. I really need to do these more often. I don't know why I don't think to do this. These coins are not going to give themselves away, so I need to make a point of doing it. So these things are really cool. If you've not seen these, even if you're familiar with challenge coins, these are pretty cool. I haven't really seen too many coins like these in my lifetime. These things are about 2 inches in diameter and a hefty 2 ounces of metal. They come in 3 colors: gold, silver, and copper. And of course, these are just colored finishes. They aren't actually made of those metals. But it's got a really cool picture of a dragon on the front, hovering over a castle with its drawbridge down, you might notice. And then my logo on the back. Now, if you look carefully at the pictures, there's this little nub on the back in the middle. And that is because this thing will actually spin on a table, kind of like a top. And if you look at the outer edge of the front, it's got the numbers 1 through 20 in random order around the edge. And the way this works is it's a D20 die, like something you would roll in Dungeons & Dragons. So when you spin the coin and then stop it with your finger, whatever number is right next to your finger is the number of your roll. So it works like a D20 die. And there is this thing called Diceware that lets you pick a random passphrase by rolling regular dice. I co-opted that concept, stole the list from the EFF, added to it because the way I'm doing it, I actually needed some extra entries, and made my own Diceware password generator based on the EFF's Diceware list and using D20s instead of regular dice. There's actually a whole website that I created devoted to this called d20key.com. That's D20key.com. So there's lots of stuff here that I hardly ever talk about, and that's just dumb. I really should talk about this stuff more. So this gives me the opportunity to talk about these things. So anyway, the details of the promotion will come after the news, so stay tuned for that. But these things are really cool, and if you haven't gotten yourself one of these things yet, now is your chance. And I don't do this often enough, so you should take the opportunity when it arises. I'll come back to this after the news show, and we'll talk about this a little bit more. All right, so we have several news stories for you today. iOS 18.4 is out. There are some bug fixes in that, and macOS has some updates as well. As usual, just stay on top of your updates. There is an interesting new location services privacy setting on iOS 18.4 I'll talk about. It's pretty simple and not that big a deal, but I want to just call your attention to it. Google's Gmail is adding AI like everybody else. And it's kind of a subtle thing, and you would have to disable it if you don't want it using AI going through all your emails. I'll tell you more about that. Microsoft Windows has for years tried really hard to force you to create a Microsoft account when you first install or first fire up Windows. There was a clever little workaround, and Microsoft isn't having that. It is trying to squash that. I'll tell you what's going on there. You can so far still bypass it. It's just not nearly as easy. WhatsApp is adding AI as well. It's rolling out in Europe, and apparently you can't even turn it off. Secure encryption and online anonymity are actually at risk in Switzerland right now, which is not usually where we would think of these things happening. They're usually pretty good about this stuff. This may just be a flash in the pan. This may go away, but I'll give you an update on that because that would affect things like Proton and Threema and NIM, which are located in Switzerland. And they're located there because the Swiss are usually pretty good about privacy. So I'll tell you what's going on with that. And then finally, we got to talk about the 2 big stories that I didn't get a chance to cover last week because it was an interview show. We're going to talk about 23andMe, the genetic testing firm. They are going bankrupt and they are selling your data. So basically what you really want to do is try to delete your data, but I'll give you an update of where things stand with that. And then finally, we need to talk about this whole Signal chat debacle with the Houthi raid. There's been a lot said about this. Some of it has not been correct. Some of it has been focusing on the wrong things. I definitely want to give you my take on that. I'm actually going to give you Bruce Schneier's take on that. And then I'll give you my thoughts on that as well. And then finally, we do have a little bit of good news. There's been a win for encryption in France. So that's your news. And then we'll have a tip of the week. I'm going to do the second part of my series on privacy enhancing technologies. I'm going to explain to you how differential privacy works. So lots to talk about. Let's get to it. All right, real quick. First off, this is from 9 to 5 Mac, and it's about a new feature in iOS 18.4, which just came out. And it's a privacy location thing. Let me just read about this real quick. The just-released iPhone software update has a bunch of headline features, including priority notification, new emojis, sketch in-image playgrounds, and more. But iOS 18.4 also has some more under-the-radar changes. As spotted by MISC, and that's M-Y-S-K, I think that's a two-person security research team who's done some really good stuff. iOS 18.4 adds a new setting buried in location services called Improve Location Accuracy. For some users, including myself, the author of the thing said this, but actually I checked and also does include me, Carrie, it was on by default. Here's what Apple says this toggle does. Your iPhone will periodically send the geotagged locations of nearby Wi-Fi hotspots and mobile phone masts, I think they mean towers, where supported by a device, in an anonymous and encrypted form to Apple to be used for augmenting this crowdsourced database of Wi-Fi hotspot and mobile phone mast locations. This sounds like it controls whether your device contributes to the assisted GPS system, which combines reading from GPS satellites with a list of known nearby detected Wi-Fi network and cell towers in order to resolve a precise location for a user more quickly. Turning off improved location accuracy does not mean your device cannot benefit from the crowdsourced database. Rather, it seems to provide a way for you to opt out of participating in it. It's unclear whether this behavior was previously incorporated as part of another setting and has been explicitly broken out into a dedicated separate toggle. Or perhaps your device would always do this in the background, and now you just have a way to explicitly opt out. If the setting is on, Apple says the data is sent to its server in an anonymized and encrypted fashion, such that there should be no privacy concerns for individuals. Okay, the article also says where you can find this, and you may have to look this up later, but you can find this link in the show notes if you want to remind yourself when you get back home or whatever. Go to Settings, go to Privacy and Security, then Location Services, and then System Services. And if you scroll down for a bit, there's an area in that set of settings called Product Improvement, and there's an Improve Location Accuracy toggle. Now, I've found this. It was turned on for me by default. I'm leaving it on. I know that Apple has very cool and unique and technologically sound ways to collect this sort of data in an anonymous fashion. And basically what Apple's doing here is leveraging its massive network of iPhones to gain useful analytic information from the environment. I think this is actually pretty cool. But of course, everyone should have the option to do this or not. I wish they would have left this off by default. Of course, if they had done that, nobody would have turned it on. So again, this is one of those things that some people think is super shady. I think it's just kind of more practical, and still I don't like it, but this is the way Apple's Find My network works as well. And if they had waited for everybody and their brother to turn this on and opt into this, it would be a lot less useful for all of us. So on one level I don't like this, on another level I understand why they're doing it. And personally I trust Apple enough with this to know that if they've gone to the effort to do all this for the Find My network, they're probably doing very similar things here. So basically, they've got billions of devices out there that can take interesting readings from their environment. And in this case, they're kind of doing some checks to say, okay, here's what the GPS says. Here's where it thinks I am. And this has already been done, by the way. This is not an Apple thing. There's been a lot of people that have crowdsourced this. They have mapped out Wi-Fi addresses, the SSIDs, like when you look up on your phone and you get a list of what Wi-Fi networks you want to join. Those names aren't unique, but they're unique enough. Certainly within a certain area, they're probably fairly unique. And more than just the name, the radios inside your phone could get things like signal strength, for example. And so if enough devices are out there and checking the signal strength, which kind of gives it a rough idea how far away it might be, if you looked at all the Wi-Fi signals in your area, you could actually probably pinpoint your location if somebody had gone to the trouble to map out where all of these things were. And over time, these devices have done that. And so anyway, these things are all kind of cooperating, and they're trying to get various points of location information to try to better and more quickly help you figure out where you are right now. So honestly, I'm not too worried about this, but FYI, this is going on. If you'd like to opt out of that, this is how you can do that. All right, next up, this is from Forbes, and I honestly don't like a lot of stuff in Forbes, but this was a decent discussion of this new Gmail AI thing. So anyway, well, let me just read this, and then again, I'll give you my take. There's a new battle taking place on your computers and your phones that will shape how you use technology for years to come. Google is leading the charge, albeit it's not alone, and Gmail will likely change more than any other platform. That means serious decisions for its 3 billion users who are well advised to think before clicking yes. We're talking AI and the breakneck speed with which new tools are being stitched into the platforms and services we all use daily. Apple may have been hit with an unintended slowdown, but not Google and Microsoft. There's no stopping them. Take your Chrome search history, for example. It's surprisingly personal, what you search for on the web and how you turn those searches. But AI will be let loose on that history, if you let it, using this to get to know you better so it can help you more. But this isn't an executive assistant. It's a technology platform owned by the world's most valuable marketing machine. Buyer beware, as they say. Or how about Microsoft's new and seemingly automated opt-in to having its own Copilot API let loose on OneDrive? And this is a quote from a PC World article says, quote, "Do you want Microsoft Copilot sniffing around your OneDrive files? Too late. Allowing AI to sniff your cloud files may seem a little creepy, but Microsoft says it will only work with your authorization," unquote. And so we come to Gmail and Google's confirmation on Thursday that, quote, Gmail is rolling out a smarter search feature powered by AI to show you the most relevant results faster, unquote. No doubt this is useful, factoring in how you engage with emails and senders to better serve up results to resolve the pain in email search. Another quote from Google, quote, "If you've ever struggled with finding information in your overflowing inbox, you're not alone," unquote. But again, this is AI set loose on your personal information. I asked Google about the privacy implications and was assured that quote, "Our priority is respecting our users' privacy while giving them choice and control over their data. To that end, this particular tool is one of the smart features that users can control in their personalization settings," unquote. And you can learn more about those settings here, and of course that's a link. There's no suggestion that your data is being siphoned off to train models or enhance marketing profiles, but it is being analyzed. As Android Police has just warned, quote, "If you think Google's terms of service are reasonable, you may still want to stop Google from storing your conversations in Gemini," and that's the name of their AI. "The AI landscape is evolving rapidly, and legislators are slow to keep up with the ethical and legal ramifications of generative AI," unquote. Users must now need to decide on their own red lines. For me, there's a big difference between auditable on-device AI analysis versus what's done in the cloud, however assuring privacy policies might be. There's a major difference between can't and won't, as Amazon's recent change to its own local versus cloud processing makes clear. And we talked about that's the Alexa Plus thing that Amazon was rolling out without giving you a choice and moving some local device processing back into the cloud. Android Police recommends turning off AI training now. It won't impact your Gemini experience and acts as insurance against any changes to Gemini's terms of service. The good news is that, quote, "You only need to turn AI training off on one device to disable it across all devices where you're signed into Gemini," unquote. The bad news is that there is a variety of privacy policies governing different platforms and services. It's worth double-checking for any AI you're using with access to private content, like emails. I've argued before that Gmail and email more widely need to catch up with the on-device processing being applied to other platforms, and here's another good reason why that's becoming so critical. It has become a selling point for new message and app security features. The same should be true for email. It's no coincidence that Apple is struggling to make AI work where others are not. As Wired says, quote, "Apple's approach to this stuff is likely not close to the norm. You'll need to be comfortable handing over large amounts of data to make Alexa work its best, while OpenAI's Sam Altman seems happy to destroy entire categories of jobs at the altar of progress. But Tim Cook and Apple? A cleaner, more positive image has for decades been part of the company's appeal, and that includes a very clear focus on privacy," unquote. This new Gmail tool is dubbed Most Relevant Search and is rolling out across personal Google accounts. Google says, quote, "It can be accessed on the web and in the official Gmail app for Android and iOS," unquote. You can toggle back and forth between legacy recent and AI relevant results. Okay, so this is really kind of hard. It's not super obvious. I looked for this on my Gmail account on the web and I did not see this option, but if you go to Gmail and do a search, apparently in the search results, like next to the search results, at the left of like the top result, you'll see most relevant with a little drop down arrow next to it. Tap this menu and then there's a sort by pop-up and you can choose most recent as opposed to, I guess, most relevant. So the most relevant apparently is using AI. See that? I mean, that's not really clear, right? And apparently if you make this change in one place, in one of your Gmail clients, it will make that change everywhere. And I thought it was interesting that they called out Apple here, and Apple definitely is struggling with AI. I think part of the reason they are struggling to get their AI situation going is they are doing their damnedest to try to do the processing locally on the device, which has limitations. Now, they also have their Apple Private Cloud Compute, which I would think they'd be leaning on here to get them through this, but I don't know. My guess is Apple is struggling to do this in a private way, and, let's face it, they were a little late to this game, and they might just be screwing up. But right now, anyway, I think for the Apple products, it kind of works in your advantage, at least in terms of privacy, if not in functionality. But just so you know, this is something that Gmail is starting to do, and if you don't like the idea of Gmail using AI to go through all your emails, apparently this is the rather subtle way to change your mind on this. And it sounds like they already opted you in. So if you don't like it, you're going to have to find this setting and opt out. All right, next up, this is from Windows Central. And it's about Microsoft trying very, very hard to force you to create a Microsoft account if you haven't already. Microsoft has confirmed that it's removing a popular command line that allowed users to bypass connecting to the internet and signing into a Microsoft account when setting up a new Windows 11 PC. When Windows 11 version 22H2 launched, Microsoft made it so that Windows 11 Home and Windows 11 Pro required an internet connection and a Microsoft account during setup, but users quickly discovered workarounds. The most popular workaround is the command bypass NRO, that's all one word, which when entered into a command prompt while in the Windows setup experience would enable the ability to skip connecting to the internet, therefore bypassing the Microsoft account requirement. As noted in the latest Windows 11 preview build, which means this update is not quite out yet for most people, the company is removing the command to, quote, ensure that all users exit setup with internet connectivity and a Microsoft account, unquote. This change will be controversial among Windows users who don't want to use a Microsoft account on Windows 11. Going forward, there'll be no easy way to bypass this requirement on a new Windows 11 PC. There are still ways to bypass these requirements, including setting up an unattend.xml installation, which bypasses the setup phase, but this requires a lot more work and includes creating a new Windows installation image from scratch. Currently, it's also possible to manually re-add the bypass NRO command to your system by typing the following, and I'm not going to say it, it's a regedit command, it's kind of long and gross. If you're really curious, though, it's in the article, you can look it up. It's unclear how long this will work, however, as Microsoft may soon remove the registry value that enabled the command to work to fully prevent users from using this method to bypass signing in with a Microsoft account. Windows 11 PCs that have already been set up without a Microsoft account will be unaffected. This change only affects the Windows 11 install and setup experience, where the OS requires an internet connection and a Microsoft account to progress. The removal of the bypass NRO command is now in testing with the latest Windows 11 beta build, which means it will likely roll out to the production versions of Windows 11 in the coming weeks. So this is just kind of a fact of modern day life. It's really, really hard to avoid setting up a Microsoft account or, by the way, an Apple iCloud account. Both free, of course, but these are, let's face it, these are ways for both Apple and Microsoft to track more about you, right? If you are associating yourself with this PC in a very explicit way, and the iCloud and the Microsoft account stuff is woven all through the operating system now, it's really, really hard to avoid. There are a lot of very useful features, for instance, parental controls, that are completely unavailable now on Microsoft, I believe, unless you have a Microsoft account set up. Not only for you, but for your children. And a lot of Apple's really cool features lean heavily on iCloud, including synchronizing settings and documents and things between devices. You can still set up a Mac today without an iCloud account, but man, they push it really hard every time. And every time you update your OS, every major update, it walks you through the setup screens again. And the default is, hey, would you like to set up an iCloud account? And then they push other stuff too. It's kind of a dark patterny thing. And I'll be honest, I set up accounts in both cases for these, though I have, for the purposes of you my audience, periodically tried to do it without, just to see what that experience is like. And it's just getting harder and harder to not do. I think that's bad practice. I think that they should always give you the clear option not to do this and should have a reasonable experience without it. But honestly, there are so many things now in the cloud and cloud-based features, AI being one of them. But there are many others, just, synchronizing things between your devices, for example, that require these accounts. And so I'm not sure what to tell you. You can try to go without, but it's becoming almost impractical not to do it. And Microsoft is now making it very hard for you to even have the choice, which really sucks. All right, next up, this is from Bleeping Computer. Short one here about WhatsApp rolling out AI and apparently not giving you a choice, which in Europe seems odd. Anyway, here's the story. You can't escape Meta AI in WhatsApp, even if you are based in one of the 41 European countries, with the feature now rolling out to more devices. On March 19, WhatsApp owner Meta, Facebook, announced that a variety of AI upgrades would be coming to users in Europe after the company paused the rollout last year. Since then, more users have started seeing the button to open Meta AI in WhatsApp. One user from the United Kingdom told me that they saw the Meta AI chatbot automatically added to WhatsApp on iOS today. Similarly, users on X and Reddit have reported that Meta AI is now appearing on WhatsApp in European countries like France, Germany, and others. In our tests, Bleeping Computer observed that Meta AI invades the existing WhatsApp experience. In addition to the AI button above the new chat button, you'll find shortcuts to Meta AI prompts when you try to search for a specific chat, group chat, or contact. The chatbot built into WhatsApp is not as powerful as Meta's AI web app, but it can answer your questions, reply with a large chunk of text, share links from Bing, Microsoft search engine, and even create images. You can also use Meta AI in WhatsApp to create stickers. However, it's not possible to transcribe audio or summarize group chat. As for privacy, Meta insists that your personal chats will not be used to train the AI models, but your conversation with Meta AI could be used to train future versions. So, well, isn't that just saying two opposite things? Anyway, unfortunately, it's not possible to turn off Meta AI in WhatsApp. If you don't want to use AI in WhatsApp, make sure you keep your hands off the AI button that appears right above the new chat button. So I don't know if that's going to prevent AI from being used. That seems odd. My guess is the AI is, or at least could be, munging on your data and chats and stuff without you actually hitting the button. But in Europe in particular, I'm really surprised that there's no way to opt out of this. Anyway, as I've been saying for months, AI is invading everything. It's the latest marketing buzzword, and it has some cool features, but it's not just about offering cool features to you. They also want to get their hands on as much raw data as possible to help train future AI models. And that, honestly, is what I'm most worried about with a lot of this AI. All right, this next one's from Tech Radar, and it's about some troubling new law changes that are being proposed in Switzerland around encryption and anonymity. Switzerland is considering amending its surveillance law to expand into new types of monitoring and data collection. The changes, which experts argue will put people's anonymity and secure encryption at risk, would widen the net of impacted service providers to virtual private networks, VPNs, messaging apps, and social networks, having previously only impacted mobile networks and internet service providers. Consultations are now public and open until May 6th of 2025. Speaking to Tech Radar, NIM VPN, that's NYM, NIM VPN has explained how it's planning to fight against it alongside encrypted messaging app Threema and Proton, the provider behind one of the best VPN and secure email services on the market. Authorities' arguments behind the need for accessing more data are always the same: catching criminals and improving security. Yet, according to NIM's co-founder and COO Alexis Roussel, being forced to leave more data behind would achieve the opposite result. And this is a quote from Alexis, quote, "Less anonymity online is not going to make things better. For example, enforcing identification of all these small services will eventually push to leaks, more data theft, and more attacks on people," unquote. The amendment aims to expand the number of service providers targeted to include so-called derived service providers. This categorization would aim to include any online service with a turnover of $100 million or more than 5,000 active users. As per the official announcement, quote, 3 types of information and 2 types of monitoring are also being created as a result of this revision, unquote. Put simply, the likes of NIM VPN and Proton VPN would be forced to modify how they handle their encryption technology and their privacy policies around securing the anonymity of their users. Considering the pushback against encryption backdoors, Switzerland seems to be taking a different approach. Yet, according to Roussel, this is more of a play on words. And this is a quote from Roussel, quote, "It's not about end-to-end encryption. They don't want to force you to reveal what's inside the communication itself, but they want to know where it goes. They realize the value is not in what's being said, but who you are talking to," unquote. So in other words, metadata. It's important to note that the current amendment is not subject to a parliamentary vote or a public referendum under Swiss law. Nonetheless, a public consultation is now ongoing so everyone can partake. NIM confirmed to TechRadar that the team has already started to build a strategy to fight against it with Proton and Threema, and they hope more people will follow suit. The plan focuses on showing the damages these changes will have for citizens' online security and the wider Swiss tech industry. And then a final quote from Roussel, quote, "NIM is still small, but Proton and Threema are very prominent companies in Switzerland," unquote, pointing out that the Swiss Army itself is using the latter service, Threema, exactly for its well-known high-level security. Again, quote, "I think we have good arguments, and I think the best argument we have is to show them that they would lose in front of a tribunal," unquote. Okay, so I actually emailed Andy Yan about this. He's the CEO of Proton, and I'm not going to tell you exactly what he said because I didn't say I was going to do that. But I will just say kind of at a high level, he didn't seem to be terribly worried about this. Certainly from Proton's perspective, I guess they do have a presence outside of Switzerland. If things were really to go south, they could, potentially deal with it that way. But he also said that these things come up from time to time and they always fight them and then they often back down. So basically I get the feeling from him that he doesn't feel too worried about this and is not convinced that this is going to become a real thing. So I'll keep you posted on this, and hopefully the argument will win the day and this will just go away. All right, now it's time to get to one of the bigger stories. And I'm sure you've seen this already on most mainstream media has been covering this. I've talked about it a little bit already. And in fact, I gave everybody a heads up when this was looking likely just 2 or 3 months ago that 23andMe, this genetic genealogy service, was looking like it was not doing well and was going to be going out of business. And then we all got really worried about what was going to happen to all this juicy data they have their hands on. Well, it has apparently come to pass. They are going bankrupt and they are selling their assets, including your data, and I would say potentially your genetic material. So as I said briefly last week, if you have used this service or know anybody who has used this service, you should immediately ask them to delete all of your data and any remaining genetic material of yours that they still have. Now, they probably already have relationships with quote-unquote partners who may have a copy of your data, and I don't know if their privacy policy, let alone their technical ability, would allow them to also delete the data with any of their partners. But at least if they don't have it, hopefully before this bankruptcy process is finished and whoever buys them gets your data, hopefully somehow you will manage to get your data deleted before it's handed off. But the article I want to read today is about the US Federal Trade Commission basically telling them that whoever buys 23andMe's data needs to keep honoring 23andMe's privacy policies. So let me read this article from Ars Technica. Federal Trade Commission Chairman Andrew Ferguson says he's keeping an eye on 23andMe's bankruptcy proceeding and the company's planned sale because of privacy concerns related to genetic testing data. 23andMe and its future owner must uphold the company's privacy promises, Ferguson said in a letter sent yesterday to representatives of the U.S. Trustee Program, a Justice Department division that oversees the administration of bankruptcy proceedings. And this is a quote from that chairman, quote, "As chairman of the Federal Trade Commission, I write to express the FTC's interests and concerns related to the potential sale or transfer of millions of American consumers' sensitive personal information," unquote. He continued, "As you may know, 23andMe collects and holds sensitive, immutable, identifiable personal information about millions of American consumers who have used the company's genetic testing and telehealth services. This includes genetic information, biological DNA samples, health information, ancestry and genealogy information, personal contact information, payment and billing information, and other information such as messages that genetic relatives can send to each other through the platform," unquote. 23andMe's recent bankruptcy announcement set off a wave of concern about the fate of genetic data for its 15 million customers. The company said that, quote, "Any buyer of 23andMe will be required to comply with our privacy policy and with all applicable law with respect to the treatment of customer data," unquote, which in the U.S. is sadly pretty darn lacking. Many users reacted to the news by deleting their data, though tech problems apparently related to increased website traffic made that process difficult. Shocking. 23andMe's ability to secure user data is also a reason for concern. Hackers stole ancestry data for 6.9 million 23andMe users, the company confirmed in December of 2023. Which we talked about back in the time. Ferguson's letter points to several promises made by 23andMe and says these pledges must be upheld. Again, quoting, "The FTC believes that, consistent with Section 363B1 of the Bankruptcy Code, these types of promises to consumers must be kept. This means that any bankruptcy-related sale or transfer involving 23andMe users' personal information and biological samples will be subject to the representations the company has made to users about both privacy and data security, and which users relied upon in providing their sensitive data to the company. Moreover, as promised by 23andMe, any purchaser should expressly agree to be bound by and adhere to the terms of 23andMe's privacy policies and applicable law, including as to any changes it subsequently makes to those policies," unquote. And continuing, quote, 23andMe has committed to its users that they are in control of their data and that users can decide how their information is used and for what purposes, including honoring the right of users to delete their personal information at any time, unquote. The firm says that explicit authorization from users is needed to disclose genetic information to third parties, though I'll stop long enough here to say if somebody buys them, then they are no longer a third party. They become the first party. Ferguson's letter said that 23andMe tells customers that it restricts the use and sharing of personal information to what is necessary to provide its services, and that it shares the personal data with a limited number of service providers who are contractually bound to protect the confidentiality and security of user personal information. The company says in its privacy statement that, quote, "It does not share personal information with insurance companies, employers, public databases, or law enforcement, absent a valid court order, subpoena, or search warrant," unquote. Sorry, there's lots of quotes in here. This is more from Ferguson. Quote, "Importantly, 23andMe promises users that these protections and its entire privacy statement shall apply continuously to their personal information, even if the data is sold or transferred in a bankruptcy proceeding," unquote. Ferguson said that he is pleased to see that 23andMe has indicated since its bankruptcy filing that it will continue to honor its privacy promises, but the letter serves as a reminder that the FTC can take action when companies fail to live up to their promises. Just how active Ferguson will be in the 23andMe bankruptcy process isn't clear. President Trump has attempted to limit FTC authority by issuing an executive order declaring that it and similar agencies are no longer independent and must be supervised by the president. So that's a whole other thing that I'm not going to get into here. It definitely does muddy the waters for things like this. Anyway, all this should be enough to make you realize that if you do have data with 23andMe, you should absolutely go through the process right now of trying to delete that data. And let's be honest, any other DNA testing service out there, right? I mean, the same thing could happen to them as well. Once you have used this service and gotten your information from them, I would absolutely say, please delete all of my data. Download whatever information you need to get and save it off somewhere, and then tell them to delete your data and any genetic material of yours they may still have. And while we're talking about it, let's just take this one step further. And I will note again that the only data that cannot be abused, stolen, sold, or taken in any other fashion that you don't wish is data that doesn't exist in the first place. So now is a great time to review any relationships and accounts that you may have that you do not longer need, or certainly if they no longer need your data, start cleaning things up, and where you can, delete that data now before it's too late. And now we get to the other big story since we had our last news show, and that has to do with this whole Signal chat leak involving all the top people in U.S. national security concerning an attack on some Houthi rebels. And I'm sure you've seen this all over the news, but I think the news, well, they definitely got some things wrong. For example, a lot of the people involved seem to want to implicate Signal as being the problem here. It absolutely was not. There's been talk about Signal having some security breaches or some other ways in which it could be abused, and was abused in this case. That is not the case. And they kind of focused on some of the wrong things. So anyway, this is a really good take on this from Bruce Schneier. It covers a couple angles that I don't think were well covered in the mainstream press. And then I'm going to give you a few more angles on this that I also don't think were given the right attention, or perhaps the wrong attention. So this is a little bit of a long article, but bear with me. There's some good stuff here. And again, this is from Bruce Schneier. U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, who started the now infamous group chat coordinating a U.S. attack against the Yemen-based Houthis on March 15th, is seemingly now suggesting that the secure messaging service Signal has security vulnerabilities. Quote, "I didn't see this loser in the group," unquote, Waltz told Fox News about the Atlantic editor-in-chief Jeffrey Goldberg, whom Waltz invited to the chat. And another quote from Waltz, quote, "Whether he did it deliberately or it happened in some other technical means is something we're trying to figure out," unquote. Waltz's implication that Goldberg may have hacked his way in was followed by a report from CBS News that the U.S. National Security Agency, or the NSA, had sent out a bulletin to its employees last month warning them about security vulnerabilities identified in Signal. The truth, however, is much more interesting. If Signal has vulnerabilities, then China, Russia, and other U.S. adversaries suddenly have a new incentive to discover them. At the same time, the NSA urgently needs to find and fix any vulnerabilities as quickly as it can, and similarly ensure that commercial smartphones are free of backdoors, access points that allow people other than a smartphone's user to bypass the usual security authentication methods to access the device's contents. This is essential for anyone who wants to keep their communications private, which should be all of us. It's common knowledge that the NSA's mission is breaking into and eavesdropping on other countries' networks. During President George W. Bush's administration, the NSA conducted warrantless taps into domestic communications as well, surveillance that several district courts ruled to be illegal before those decisions were later overturned by appeals courts. To this day, many legal experts maintain that the program violated federal privacy regulations. But the organization, the NSA, has a secondary complementary responsibility to protect U.S. communications from others who want to spy on them. That is to say, while one part of the NSA is listening into foreign communications, another part is stopping foreigners from doing the same to Americans. Those missions never contradicted during the Cold War, when allied and enemy communications were wholly separate. Today, though, everyone uses the same computers, the same software, and the same networks. This creates a tension. When the NSA discovers a technological vulnerability in a service such as Signal, or buys one on the thriving clandestine vulnerability market, does it exploit it in secret, or reveal it so that it can be fixed? Since at least 2014, a U.S. government interagency equities process has been used to decide whether it is in the national interest to take advantage of a particular security flaw or to fix it. The trade-offs are often complicated and hard. Waltz, along with Vice President J.D. Vance, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and the other officials in the Signal Group, have just made the trade-offs much tougher to resolve. Signal is both widely available and widely used. Smaller governments that can't afford their own military-grade encryption use it. Journalists, human rights workers, persecuted minorities, dissidents, corporate executives, and criminals around the world use it as well. Many of these populations are of great interest to the NSA. At the same time, as we have now discovered, the app is being used for operational U.S. military traffic. So what does the NSA do if it finds a security flaw in Signal? Previously, it might have preferred to keep the flaw quiet and use it to listen to adversaries. Now, if the agency does that, it risks someone else finding the same vulnerability and using it against the US government. And if it was later disclosed that the NSA could have fixed the problem and didn't, then the results might be catastrophic for the agency. Smartphones present a similar trade-off. The biggest risk of eavesdropping on a Signal conversation comes from the individual phones that the app is running on. While it's largely unclear whether the U.S. officials involved had downloaded the app onto personal or government-issued phones, although Witkoff suggested on X that the program was on his personal devices, smartphones are consumer devices not at all suitable for classified U.S. government conversations. An entire industry of spyware companies sells capabilities to remotely hack smartphones for any country willing to pay. More capable countries have more sophisticated operations. Just last year, attacks that were later attributed to China attempted to access both President Donald Trump and Vance's smartphones. Previously, the FBI, as well as law enforcement agencies in other countries, have pressured both Apple and Google to add quote-unquote back doors to their phones to more easily facilitate court-authorized eavesdropping. These backdoors would create, of course, another vulnerability to be exploited. A separate attack from China last year accessed a similar capability built into U.S. telecommunications networks, and I'll come back to that in a second. The vulnerabilities equities have swung against weakened smartphone security and toward protecting the devices that senior government officials now use to discuss military secrets. That also means that they have swung against the U.S. government hoarding Signal vulnerabilities and toward full disclosure. This is plausibly good news for Americans who want to talk among themselves without having anyone, government or otherwise, listen in. We don't know what pressure the Trump administration is using to make intelligence services fall into line, but it isn't crazy to worry that the NSA might again start monitoring domestic communications. Because of the Signal chat leak, it's less likely that they'll use vulnerabilities in Signal to do that. Equally, bad actors such as drug cartels may also feel safer using Signal. Their security against the U.S. government lies in the fact that the U.S. government shares their vulnerabilities. No one wants their secrets exposed. I have long advocated for a defense-dominant cybersecurity strategy. As long as smartphones are in the pocket of every government official, police officer, judge, CEO, and nuclear power plant operator, and now they are being used for what the White House now calls sensitive, if not outright classified communications among cabinet members, we need them to be as secure as possible. And that means no government-mandated backdoors. We may find out more about how officials, including the Vice President of the United States, came to be using Signal on what seemed to be consumer-grade smartphones in an apparent breach of the laws on government records. It's unlikely that they really thought through the consequences of their actions. Nonetheless, those consequences are real. Other governments, possibly including U.S. allies, will now have much more incentive to break Signal's security than they did in the past, and more incentive to hack U.S. government smartphones than they did before March 24th. For just the same reason, the U.S. government has urgent incentives to protect them. So, Bruce's point here is that he believes we should be defense first. When I say we here, we're talking about the United States government security agencies, should be trying to protect everything, which protects us all. Instead of, for example, if they found some way to break into some of these security apps like Signal, they could hoard that for themselves and use it to try to crack into the communications of foreign people, or let's face it, U.S. people as well, so that they could monitor them and, do what intelligence agencies do. But as basically what Bruce is saying, as we've just seen here, that cuts both ways. So the better stance he is saying here is that we should prioritize defense for everybody first. Now, he mentioned a separate attack last year from China that accessed a similar capability. What he meant by that was a backdoor. It was called CALIA, or the Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act, which was passed in 1994. I actually remember when I worked at B&R or Nortel at the time that I was doing a feature that was kind of around this, actually. But basically, once phone lines went from copper wire to digital connections, the government said, hey, we can't do wiretaps like we used to anymore by putting little alligator clips on the copper wires. So when we get a warrant that we want to listen to, the bad guys, we need a way to do that. So by law, we're going to force the telecom companies, as they build their massive digital computer switches that handle phone calls that you must have a digital way for us to wiretap any line that we want. And there's put restrictions in on that. Companies weren't supposed to do this willy-nilly, supposed to have a warrant, blah, blah, blah. But it was there. This was a back door. This was a way to tap into conversations. And the Chinese government basically hacked that and used that capability for themselves in an effort called Volt Typhoon to tap all of our communications. And to this day, I am still not convinced that we have kicked them out of our systems. I would have to assume at this point that they could potentially listen to all of our communications going forward. And this is any of our phone conversations. And surprise, this is what happens when you create a backdoor. You can't create a backdoor that only the good guys can go through. Okay, but for all the talk in this article about Signal having a problem, that is not actually the real issue with this whole thing. Signal itself, as far as we know, is absolutely fine. It's working as expected and is just as secure as it ever was. It is still pretty much the gold standard because it's so easy to use and it is very, very well secured, which is why a lot of military folks and apparently cabinet officials like to keep it on their phones. What this does expose, however, and I've talked about this many times, is that end-to-end encryption is great unless you happen to be at one of the two ends, because the messages you send over this network are completely garbled such that anybody along the way who manages to intercept that message will have no way of telling what you are saying. But by necessity, those messages are unencrypted at the beginning and the end, right? At each end on the device, on your phone, for example, or on your computer where you're sending or receiving that message. And so there's been a lot of effort by certainly nation state actors to try to hack into the personal devices of sensitive government officials, just like all the ones that were on this Signal chat talking about strikes against the Houthis. And honestly, it doesn't really matter too much whether these are personal devices or government-issued devices, because they're probably still iPhones and Android devices. The government-issued ones, I'm sure, have got a lot more things locked down on them. And I don't think I've heard yet whether or not we know if they were using personal devices or government devices. But regardless, the Signal app, despite its security, is not to be used by government officials to transmit classified communications. Now, this is something else that was talked about a lot in the news, and a lot of these officials were claiming that none of what they were sending was classified. I'm sorry, that is complete bullshit. It doesn't have to be stamped on a piece of paper with the big red top secret stamp for something to be classified. There are a lot of rules around classified information, and anything involving certainly a future military attack is going to be something that would qualify as classified. I actually watched some of the testimony around this, and they read from various manuals from different agencies, of which these people were the heads of in a lot of cases, that they should know like the back of their hand that anything that fits this definition is classified. And the types of information they were sending would have qualified under this definition as something that should be considered classified. And therefore, the methods they were using to exchange that information were not approved for that purpose. There are ways for these people to talk about and classified stuff. They're called SCIFs, or Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. These are special rooms like the Situation Room or whatever. These are special kind of rooms that are purpose-built for secure communications. And when you go in these rooms, you can't take your Apple Watch, you can't take your phone, you can't take any electronic devices with you when you go in there. There's a lot of process around this to keep these kind of communications secure. If by some chance somebody on this, I think it was Waltz, accidentally added to this chat was not a journalist, but somebody who might have communicated this stuff to the Houthis ahead of time, because this was happening before the strikes took place, they could have taken actions to protect themselves or to attack the attackers. A lot was made of the fact that somebody goofed up and added this journalist to this private chat about a military attack. And yes, that was a really bad human screw up. And it was a complete and absolute OPSEC failure, operational security failure, that all the people on that group chat should have looked to see who else was on that chat and should have said, hey, who is this person? But nobody did. And by the way, if you looked at these things, a lot of these things just had initials on them. So like, how would you even know who this person was? Well, in Signal, if someone signs up with just their initials, you can give them your own nickname so that you at least know who they are, despite however they want to declare themselves as their ID. So you should absolutely be using Signal's nicknames for all of your contacts, so you know which John you're talking to. And so let's just face it. If anybody at a lower rank than these guys had done what these guys did, they would have been fired and perhaps court-martialed or had legal proceedings taken against them, because I am pretty darn sure, given everything I just said, that what they did is technically illegal. Now, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't say for sure, but man, it sure looks that way to me. But it's also certainly would have been a fireable offense to anybody at a lower level. On top of all that, by the way, they were using Signal, which there are also laws around keeping records of official government communications. My guess is nobody was going to be submitting that to the proper authorities within the government who handles keeping track of all these records. But also, they had also sent the Signal messages to automatically delete after a certain period of time, which, again, kind of makes it look like those were going to get lost to history, which, again, it seems dumb, but this is illegal. That you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to keep track of this stuff and submit it to the archivist. I think that's the title of the person who handles this stuff, and to keep track of these records. Now, they'll keep them classified for a certain period of time, but they need to have a record of these things, and not making them available is against the law. And then if none of that bothers you, I'll just throw out one more thing. This is the one that we know of. What else have they been communicating on their phones over Signal? There absolutely needs to be an investigation into this, and I believe there is one. I just hope it doesn't get squashed. But this was really bad on multiple levels. However, before we go, there is one silver lining here, I guess, and that is apparently the new downloads of this for the Signal app have gone through the roof. There was another article I was going to read, but I'll just read a snippet of here. It's from Andy Greenberg from Ars Technica, and just this little snippet I want to read. It says, the ensuing news cycle and the constant mentions of Signal have led to the encrypted messaging platform doubling its usual rate of new downloads, the nonprofit organization that runs Signal tells Wired. Given that 2025 has already been a banner year for Signal's growth, according to Signal's leadership, that makes this week the single biggest bump in U.S. adoption of the app in Signal's nearly 11 years of existence. And this is a quote from somebody at Signal who says, quote, in Signal's history, this is the largest U.S. growth moment by a massive margin. It's mind-blowing even on our side, unquote. So, yeah. The problem here is not Signal. Signal's great. Signal's fantastic. Signal's does what it says it does. And if you have not downloaded it, hey, everybody's doing it. Jump on the bandwagon. It's pretty darn cool. Check it out. Okay, and as promised, we've got one bit of good news, and this is from the EFF. In a moment of clarity, after initially moving forward in a deeply flawed piece of legislation, the French National Assembly has done the right thing. It rejected a dangerous proposal that would have gutted end-to-end encryption in the name of fighting drug trafficking. Despite heavy pressure from the Interior Ministry, lawmakers voted Thursday night to strike down a provision that would have forced messaging platforms like Signal and WhatsApp to allow hidden access to private conversations. The vote is a victory for digital rights, for privacy and security, and for common sense. The proposed law was a surveillance wish list disguised as anti-drug legislation. Tucked into its text was a resurrection of the widely discredited ghost participant model, a backdoor that pretends not to be one. Under this scheme, law enforcement could silently join encrypted chats, undermining the very idea of private communication. Security experts have condemned the approach, warning it would introduce systemic vulnerabilities, damage trust in secure communication platforms, and create tools ripe for abuse. The French lawmakers who voted this provision down deserve credit. They listened not only to French digital rights organizations and technologists, but also to basic principles of cybersecurity and civil liberties. They understood that encryption protects everyone, not just activists and dissidents, but also journalists, medical professionals, abuse survivors, and ordinary citizens trying to live private lives in an increasingly surveilled world. France's rejection of the backdoor provisions should send a message to legislatures around the world: you don't have to sacrifice fundamental rights in the name of public safety. Encryption is not the enemy of justice. It's a tool that supports our fundamental human rights, including the right to have a private conversation. It is a pillar of modern democracy and cybersecurity. As governments in the US, UK, Australia, and elsewhere continue to flirt with anti-encryption laws, this decision should serve as a model and a warning. Undermining encryption doesn't make society safer. It makes everyone more vulnerable. This victory was not inevitable. It came after sustained public pressure, expert input, and tireless advocacy from civil society. It shows that pushing back works. But for the foreseeable future, misguided lobbyists for police and national security agencies will continue to push similar proposals, perhaps repackaged or rushed through quieter legislative moments. Supporters of privacy should celebrate this win today. Tomorrow, we will continue to keep watch. So I think that's a good counterpoint to the article I just read, and give you a little more context of why things like this are so important, and we need to protect our ability to have private communications. Privacy is a human right. We need it for society and for democracy, to be honest. So this is a win, and like the article says, we should celebrate that and then be careful because this will come up again in other contexts in other countries. Okay, that is the news for the week. So let's get to my tip of the week, and this is the second, I think, in my series of talks that I want to give about privacy-enhancing technologies, PETs. The first one, if you recall, was onion routing. We talked about that several weeks ago. If you missed that, you can go back and check out the podcast, or you can find the article on firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com. But today I want to talk about another one that's pretty cool and actually kind of straightforward. I think it's much easier to understand than onion routing is. And it's called differential privacy. And it's a mathematical technique to allow us to collect a lot of potentially very personal data about people and get interesting and useful statistics from that data so we can study that data without exposing any individual person in the response set to privacy concerns. One way to think about this is taking a massive picture of a crowd and then fuzzing everybody's faces in such a way that you can still, let's say, count how many people were there, count how many people were wearing green shirts, count how many people were wearing hats, maybe count how many were men versus women, but without actually being able to individually identify anybody in the crowd. Furthermore, not even be able to prove that anybody was in that crowd. And we have a mathematical technique for this that we call differential privacy. And this technique was maybe famously used in the 2020 US Census data. The census is something that's in the US Constitution. This is something that we mandate every 10 years. We collect information about the populace because we, for one thing, we apportion people in the House of Representatives based on population. And there are lots of other things that a civil society can do with that kind of information to make better judgments about how we should be spending money, for example. So the census is really important data. It tells us a lot about us as a country, and therefore has a lot of personal stuff in it, age, location, gender, ethnicity, and so on and so on. So we want to be able to collect this data. In fact, we require U.S. citizens to provide this data every 10 years. And then we publish that data in a way that in the past has kind of artificially tried to limit how much information you could get about any individual person in this massive trove of census data. But in 2020 in particular, we brought out this technology called differential privacy. So think about it this way. Let's say I had a bunch of census data for 330 million people in the United States, but I want to know the income of my elderly neighbor. Something about her seems off. I want to know how much money she makes. And I can't remember if that's in the census or not, but let's say that your annual income is in the census. So the interface to the census data doesn't allow me to say, how much does my neighbor make? But it lets me ask questions around groups of people. So let's say I could say, all right, how many people live in my neighborhood? So that's a group of people. It's not specific. Then it says, okay, there's 36 people in your neighborhood. Okay, how many people in my neighborhood are female? And it says, well, there's 16 people in your neighborhood that are female. And then I say, okay, how many people in my neighborhood are age 80 or older? And it says, oh, there's only 3 in your neighborhood that are that old. So then I can say, how many females are age 80 and older? And it says, there's just 1. So now I can say, what's the household income of all females over age 80 in my neighborhood? And it gives me, let's say, $32,000. I now know through a series of questions that never asked about the information of a specific person, but I was able to create subsets of that data. Think of like Venn diagrams, right? Circles around people in my neighborhood, such that if I ask enough questions in the right way, eventually I can get to the point where there's only one person where all of those circles overlap. Now, you might think, okay, that's kind of contrived. And it is. But it's actually been shown time and time again that quote unquote anonymized data sets are actually sometimes even trivially capable of being re-identified through clever means like the ones I just told you, or often case actually by taking one public data set that is anonymized or de-identified, things like names and addresses removed, and another similar data set where I can correlate the two and then figure out who somebody is. And a classic example of this was the Netflix prize competition. Netflix back in the day had made a really big deal out of their algorithm for movie suggestions. Like if you took the time as you watched movies on Netflix to rank them, give them a thumbs up or a thumbs down, it would take all that information from people and correlate it across all of their customers to say, well, if you like this, then you'll probably like this. And they were really proud of this recommendation algorithm, but they wanted it to be better. So they took all of their data, which was at the time like 100 million rankings for something like 500,000 Netflix users, and they de-identified that data. So they took everyone's ratings and they kept them associated with an individual person, but they took the person's name off, basically, and said, okay, here's this quote unquote anonymized data. Go to town, help us improve our algorithm. If you can improve our algorithm, if you can improve the recommendations, I think it was 10% or something like that, then you would win the prize. Well, the claim was that they anonymized this data, therefore protecting the privacy of their users, but somebody took all that data, cross-referenced it with IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, where people did share their names in a lot of cases and ratings. And by correlating those two sets of data, we're basically able to re-identify a lot of people in that supposedly anonymized data set. Okay, so how do we solve this? Well, differential privacy basically takes the data and puts in a known set of statistically modified like fudge factors. It fuzzes the data. It's kind of like blurring the faces of the people in the crowd. And let's take a simple example. So let's say I tell everybody to tell me their age, their exact age, their true age. And so that could be very identifying, right? If I knew someone's age, and I could probably pretty quickly pick them out of a small data set. But now, instead of giving me your true age, I want you to fudge that age. I want you to take a die, a 6-sided die, and roll it. And if you get a 1, 2, or 3, I want you to add that to your age before you submit it. If you get a 4, 5, or 6, I want you to subtract 1, 2, or 3, respectively, from your age. So I want you to basically randomly lie in a fixed and known way about your age. And so if everybody does this, if everybody fuzzes their age plus or minus 3 before they submit, on average, those modifications sort out. If I want to find the average age of everybody in my neighborhood and everybody did this method I just told you about, the average age would still be pretty darn accurate. And the larger the data set is, the more accurate it would be. But if I were to look at individual lines in there and all the data had this kind of a fuzzing going on where there's a random little bit more or less on each of these data points, that would make any individual entry in there really hard to pinpoint to a real person because some of that data is not true. Now, there's actually 2 flavors of this. One is what we call local and one is what's called central. And the census uses central. And that is this fuzzing is done after the fact. People submit all the real data, and that real data is kept in a vault and, very limited access. But this aggregate access where people can ask questions about broader sets or subsets of that data, then that data is fuzzed with these kind of techniques such that questions about averages and means and more aggregate statistics about this information are still pretty close to correct, close enough to be useful, but I can't ask a bunch of those weird overlapping subset questions to try to pick out and find the detailed information about any one person in that set. Now, the other way to do this is what's called local differential privacy, and that is where the data is actually fuzzed and tweaked on your device, let's say on your computer or on your smartphone, before it's ever sent. It has the same basic effect, but it can actually make things a little less accurate when done this way. But it's much better in terms of privacy preserving because your actual data never even leaves your device. Like nobody has your data except you. And Apple and Google are actually using this. If you read the article, I've got some links to this, but Apple does this when it collects emoji statistics. I guess it keeps analytics on how often people use emojis, probably for its predictive algorithms, to suggest something you might want to put in. And Google does this for some of its Chrome statistics as well. And of course, the big one is the US Census. As of 2020, is using these techniques. So that's pretty cool. And this is a way to show that we have ways, technical means, with mathematical rigor, we can come up with some really clever ways to collect a lot of very personal information in a way that still preserves the privacy of the individual responders and yet still allows us to run some really cool math and get statistics and information about the respondents in aggregate. So if you want to learn more, go to firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com or go to the show notes. You'll find a link to the article. And it's mostly what I just said, but there's also links in there that takes you to some other stuff, including a little video that you might find helpful. So there you have it. There's your news and your tip of the week. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for this week. I do want to tell you about this challenge coin promotion. In case you haven't heard of this before, last time I did this, I think, was a year ago. I think exactly a year ago. I did it last April. So I got this idea several years ago when I saw some other coins for sale. Actually, I saw it was a D20 die being sold by this company for this purpose, and I thought, I wonder if I could do a custom one. I wonder if I could make one for me, for myself. And then I thought, well, if I did that, I should probably make them and give them away. It'd be a cool thing to give away for promotions. So several years ago, I made the version 1 of these, and I really, really liked them. And I was much better about promoting those because those are basically all gone at this point. I just have a handful of those left. But they were so popular, I was like, I want to do it again. And at that point, I had remade my logo. And so I wanted that to be on the coin. So the front is the same, but the back has got the new updated logo on it. And my catchphrase, don't get caught with your drawbridge down. And by the way, on the front, the castle that the dragon is attacking has its drawbridge down. That was on purpose. And so I minted another 100 of these coins. And sadly, I still have a bunch of those left because I have not been taking the time to market them through promotions like this where I give them away. So the way I'm giving these away is if you become a patron, if you go to Patreon, look up Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons, of course. There are links in the show notes, or if you can remember this, you can go to fdsd.me/promo425. 4 is in April, the month April, 25 is in the year 2025. So promo 425. That will take you to the blog entry that gives you all the details, including nice pictures and even a little video of the coin and how you'd spin it and to use it as a D20. And you can find the links that show all the different colors. It comes in 3 metal finishes. They're not obviously really they're not really these metals, but there's a gold finish, a silver finish, and a copper finish. And you can see what those look like and decide which one you want. But if you become a patron at either the Knight Errant level or the Dragon Slayer level, which is above that, if you become a new patron and you subscribe for a year, this has to be done with an annual membership. If you sign up for a year at one of those 2 levels, I will give you one of these coins. Asterisk. They're expensive to ship. Well, normally, that's not too bad in the US, but they're definitely expensive to ship internationally. So I will ship you a coin at Knight Errant level if you're in the US. However, if you're outside the United States and you want to get one of these as part of this promotion anyway, you'll need to be Dragon Slayer or above. But to make it easier for you to do that, I also have what I'm calling my treasure chest promotion. And this is something that's ongoing. This is something I'm going to keep doing at least until I run out of these promo codes. But I have valuable promotion codes from Proton, the people do the Proton Mail and Proton VPN, Malwarebytes for their antivirus, and Safing for their Portmaster Plus product. And then if you know what that is, you know what that is. If you don't, you might look it up. You might be interested. But they're basically worth $40 to $50 a piece. And so if you sign up or actually resubscribe annually as a patron at one of those 2 levels, you will get access to one of those promo codes, which basically kind of subsidizes or offsets your cost. So again, this is going to be the Dragon coin part of this is going to be running all through the month of April. The treasure chest part, the promo code part, is available to my patrons, like I said, at least until these promo codes run out. I actually just got a new batch of Proton codes because those were the most popular. So I've got plenty now to give out. And, every year, basically, if you stick on as a patron, every year when you re-sign up again for another year, you'll qualify to get another one of those promo codes. But the key thing is, if you want one of these super cool, security-enhancing, very rare and hard to find Dragon coins, you need to get one this month. One other thing I will say about these Dragon Challenge coins is if you meet me in person and present your coin to me, that's worth a free drink on me. Where might you find me? Well, more likely it would be probably at a hacker conference or something like that. But that is yet another perk of the Dragon Challenge coins. But honestly, they just look super cool. So check them out. Go to fdsd.me/promo425 to get the details. That article shows you the gold color. If you want to see the silver and copper colors, there's a link in that to show you the full colors and a little bit of close-ups of the coin. So check it out. You got 1 month. Tell your friends. Help me promote this on social media. I would appreciate that. And if you missed this really cool coin, now is your chance to get one. Okay, just to quickly wrap up, Merlin's Musings this week for my high-tier patrons, which, like those that are handled in this promotion, will get my Merlin's Musings bonus podcast this week. And this week I'm going to be talking about how Apple AirTags can track your stuff without giving away your identity. It's actually some pretty cool technology. So as usual, on news weeks, the Merlin's Musings episode will drop to my top-tier patrons on Thursday. Next week, we got our interview with Oz Jones, who is a blue team expert, in other words, for defending networks. We'll talk about how tricky that is to do and take home some advice from him. And coming up, we'll be talking with Zach Edwards and Bruce and Heidi Potter from ShmooCon fame, Cory Doctorow, and much, much more. So subscribe if you have not, so you don't miss any of that goodness. That's going to do it for this week, everybody. Take care out there. Stay safe, everybody. And until next week, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.